Welcome to Industry Idle Walkthrough. In this tutorial, I'm just going to walk you through some very basic game concept to help you get started. So when you first load the game, you will basically have a map like this. This is the default map called Stockholm. And by the way, you can switch to a new map or restart on this map by going to the Swiss shop and click Start in a new city. And here you will enter the city selection screen where you'll be able to find all the other maps available. So we're not going to restart now, so let's go back. So the few basic concepts you need to grasp before expanding on this game. The first is power. So every building you see on this map uses power. And we have a wind turbine that actually generates power. But as you can see, the wind turbine only works 80% of the time. So when it's not working, let's see. There you go. So when it shuts down, you can see the oil production also shuts down. So it is a good idea to always make sure you have enough power. So let's go ahead and build another wind turbine. And you can see these little tiny dots moving. They're basically resources being transported. Resource transportation are automatic, but they actually cost fuel. So in order to have the resource moving, you need to produce enough fuel. And you can go to these logistics center to see the current fuel type. There are actually only two fuel types in this game at the moment. There's petroleum and natural gas. So on this map, since we don't have a natural gas vent, we're gonna have to use petroleum. So to produce petroleum, you start with an oil well. An oil well just basically drills oil from the oil deposit, and then you need an oil refinery that takes the oil and converts it to petroleum and plastic. So it's good to always check your sort of fuel production level before you expand. So you can click here. And here it shows like my fuel surplus is always going up. So I have like more than enough so I can expand. The first thing you want to expand is by building mines on those natural resources. So on this map I have like silicon, aluminum, and this is forest. I can build a logging camp on top of it. This is a coal mine and iron mine. So when you build these mining, it will start automatically mining the resources, and you can see them actually in your trade center that these are actually increasing. So once you have these resources, you can turn on auto sell. Auto sell, or basically exporting from the trade center, is the only way you make, or actually mostly the only way you make money. So you can turn them on. So I only have 3, so I can only turn on 3 of them. So I'm now selling wood, plastic, and silicon. And you can see all these resources being pulled to this trade center automatically, and they're being exported, and you get cash instead. And you can see my cash is going up. And when you click on an empty tile, you see all these buildings being locked. And the way to unlock them is in the research center. In the research, you can actually see what's being currently being worked on. And you see that to unlock all of these buildings, you need the resources first. So for example, if I want to unlock the battery factory, I need aluminum, coal, iron, and something called research point. So research point is basically the kind of a research currency you can think of. And to produce research point, if you click onto the research lab, you can see that the research lab converts science into research point. So the input is science, and the output is research point. And the conversion rate is like 10 to 1. So basically for every second, it pulls in 100 science, and it produces 10 research point. So now you need to produce science, and the science production comes from 2 parts. All the power buildings like wind turbine produce a tiny amount of science when they're running. So it makes sense to build a little bit more in the beginning to speed up your science production. And the other way to produce science, you can find those dedicated buildings. Let's see. For example, Polytechnic is the building where it takes semiconductor and produce science, but we don't actually have semiconductor now, so we're gonna mostly rely on these power buildings for our early research need. And to to actually build buildings, you need something called building permit. And if you run out of building permit, it will remind you that you need to buy the permit first. And you can also just buy the permit in your headquarters, like here. So now if we want to build like aluminum mine, it's gonna tell us, well, not enough building permits, so we can just buy. We can buy 1, 5, or 10. Let's just buy 10 since it's cheap. Let's build more mines, more oil, and more silicon mine. So it pretty much makes sense to build mines on top of these resources next to your base, because it actually, since it's closer to your base, it's easier and cheaper to export. You see all the distance that the tiny dots are traveling. The longer the distance, the more fuel cost. So you kind of want all the resources to be very close to each other, or at least the factory that uses resources to be close to the source. And the trade center automatically sell your resources at a certain speed. The speed is here. So it actually sells 10 per second. You might want to upgrade this in the early game, because this is pretty much the bottleneck on how much money you make. You can see that I'm exporting wood, plastic, and silicon, but I have quite a few of them left in inventory because I actually can't export them fast enough. So I can upgrade them. Let's see. So to 20. And if I upgrade them to 20, you can see that I've of course used quite a bit of cash, but then my cash sort of income per second actually increased to quite a bit. And by the way, all the default values shows here are the moving average. So if you don't want to see the moving average, you want to see the real-time value, you can just go to these settings, go to headquarters, go to the settings, and turn off the moving average. Now it will basically show the real-time number. Every building in this game can be upgraded. Upgrading a building will produce more output. As you can see, the level 1 oil will produce 10 oil. So if I upgrade it, let's say to level 9, it will actually produce 90. And there's this something called multiplier. Basically, for every 10 level, you get 1 multiplier. So if I upgrade it to level 10, instead of getting 100, I'll be getting 200. But as you can see, if you upgrade the building, the power usage also increases. So it actually makes sense to make sure that you also have enough power supply and also fuel supply before you upgrade your buildings. Because if you have produce more resources to transport these resources, you would also need more fuel. So as you can see, a lot of these, we can go to our chart. We can see that our transportation started to drain down so that we don't have enough fuel at the moment. And our power supplies, it's like not very stable. So a lot of the times when we have 0, meaning that we are running out of power. So it makes sense to upgrade the power plant. So we can upgrade. And you can use your keyboard shortcut 1. Just press the 1 key, would upgrade them. And we upgraded the windmill. As you can see now, the power started to become normal, and we started to have some surplus of power, which is good. And now we need to fix the transportation. The fuel production is mostly the oil refinery, so let's upgrade to level 5. And then let's go to the Statistics Bureau and see now the transportation started to go, the fuel surpluses to go to positive, and my fuel started to go up, which is good. That means I'm ready for expansion. So always check the transportations and powers are positive before you expand. Otherwise, you will basically run into problems when everything just running out of fuel and the economy will halt. And the only reason to save this is to go to the trade center and just buy a lot of petrol, which is not a good idea in the longer term, because as you can see, the more stuff you buy, you would drive up the price. If I buy 10K, you can see the price went to $20. So it's always a good idea to make sure that you can have enough fuel and power before you expand. To upgrade and unlock a building, you go to the research center and you can see which buildings are currently can be unlocked. So as you can see, I can actually unlock battery factory, steel mill, and coal power plant. So I have quite a few coal and iron, so let me just unlock the steel mill. So now if you click an empty tile, you can see that you can build a steel mill. So steel mill needs iron and coal, so it makes sense to build this next to an iron and coal mine because you can minimize the resource transportation distance, which will in turn minimize your fuel cost. So the steel mill is not running because there's not enough petroleum. So now my economy runs into a halt because nothing actually runs anymore because I actually don't have enough fuel. If it goes here, you can see that my fuel is 0. So if you're stuck in this case, the easiest thing to do is basically go to the trade center and buy a lot of petroleum to restart your economy and then fix your fuel production right away. So now I need to upgrade an oil refinery or maybe build another one. Let's build another one. And you can see that my fuel is still draining, so I need to fix it before it drains out. So let me just build another one, upgrade it to level 5. Maybe I not need another one. Let's see. Okay, it's still draining, so that's not a good sign. So, right, so these 3 are working. You can also turn off this, because this costs fuel, which we don't really need right now. And now you can see that our fuel's starting to grow, fuel in storage started to grow a little bit, which is a good sign. And if you see these buildings not producing, you can highlight and it tells you why it's not producing. So here it basically says, I don't have enough power. So let's go ahead and upgrade some of our power plant, or maybe build a bit more, because the solar panel, they only work 50% of the time and they shut down and turn on at the same time, which means that we were going to have these power cycles. So the wind, although they also works like only 80% of the time, but their cycles are not aligned, meaning that if you build more windmill or wind turbine, it would actually even out eventually, so which is a good idea to do. And we can actually go ahead and sell this petrol power plant because we don't need it for now. And yeah, we just unlocked the steel mill, and you can actually upgrade the steel mill to produce more. And then when you go to the trade center, you can see that you can export steel because now you have them. And in general, the resources that actually cost other resources to produce, the more like upstream the resource, or the more requirement the resource are, the more expensive it will be. So it makes sense to, instead of selling coal, to actually sell steel. And since our auto cell capacity is 40 per second, and we're producing only 10, it makes sense to actually match. So that like we can actually export just enough steel. And the steel mill, it says it's not running because the power issues. And now let's go ahead and upgrade these power plants a little bit. The last thing I want to touch is the culture and policy. So the policy center, which is this icon, if you click, it basically gives you a lot of policies. Some of these policies would basically allows you to change some of the resource input, or basically produce resource in a different way. So we can actually see there is this thing called knowledge through steel, which says that the steel mill uses twice the input, but also produce science. Since we need science at the moment, let's turn on that policy. And you can see that the policy will actually cost something called policy point. The policy point here requires the culture to produce. Like the research point, it basically turns 100 culture per second to 10 policy points. So the culture are produced by dedicated buildings. So unlike research point where you can actually produce them from the power plant, you can only get culture from dedicated buildings like, let's see, like for example Colosseum. Colosseum takes a shoe and a cloth and produce culture. So if you want a stable sort of use of this policy, you can see that your policy point is draining out because we're not producing any. So if you want to turn on this policy all the time, you need to have enough like culture supply to maintain this. And like research lab and policy center, you can upgrade these research point generation by upgrading the building itself. So if I upgrade to level 2, basically it doubles the capacity, but you also need to produce twice as much of the science. So it's good to actually upgrade this based on how much science we're producing at the moment. And the logistic department, other than showing you what's the fuel type, allows you to inspect the top 20 fuel cost route. So this will shows me that like I can click on this to actually center on the building, so I can see that transporting from this oil refinery to the trade center was actually my most expensive cost, transportation cost. And this allows you to sort of know which is the most expensive fuel cost and whether it makes sense. Can you optimize that? And let's go ahead and build some more mine. And right now we can already unlock the coal power plant. The coal power plant, which actually takes coal and produce power, unlike these renewable energies, those fossil fuel power plants like coal, petrol, gas, they actually produce stable power. So if I build a coal power plant, you can see that actually it works all the time as long as you have enough coal supply. So because all these renewable energies don't produce stable power, it makes sense to mix and match these two to make sure that you always have enough power to run your buildings. And be sure to always check your power and your fuel before you expand or upgrade. Remember, upgrading a building also consumes more power, as you can see, and more resources that it pulls, the more fuel they actually need. So now I've let my game run a little bit for a while, and I've expanded my economy. I just want to illustrate a few more points. The first is something called adjacent bonus. So for every building of the same type on an adjacent tile, you get a bonus. So in this case, we have this oil refinery, which got 30% because you have 1, 2, 3. And if I build another oil refinery here on the top, now wait for it to complete. And you can see the adjacent bonus is 40%. So it actually makes sense to build buildings of the same type together to take advantage of that so that you get more capacity to your building. The next thing is for the research. So for example, if I want to unlock the closing factory, I actually don't have enough paper at the moment. I could either wait for the paper production, or I could basically go to the trade center and just buy them. As you can see, I buy a lot of paper that push up the price. Actually, I probably shouldn't want to sell that. That push up the paper price to quite a lot. And if I go to my research, the where's my closing factory? Where's my closing? Oh, now actually lacks research point because I push up the price of the paper, and now it actually needs more research point. So maybe I shouldn't buy that much. Maybe I can keep selling some of these paper to hopefully these will bring down the cost a little bit. So while we're waiting for that, the next thing I want to explain is these orders. So all these orders, they basically are the from the wholesale center. These are the batch orders you can fill. So this actually doesn't cost, this gives you kind of a chance to convert a batch of resources to money. And you are not limited by the auto sell capacity of this trade center. So, but you have to fill the order like in a batch. So now I can actually fill, because I have all of these, I can just fill the order and fill these order. And these usually gives not only some extra cash, because these orders are usually more profitable compared to the trade center, they also give you some extra policy points and research point as a reward. So it is always a good idea to make use, take advantage of this and fill as much order as you can. So now, after we fill these orders, we can see the research point is almost there. We can also upgrade the research point generation here. So let's see. So we're almost there. So while we're waiting for that, the next thing I want to explain is is basically the culture production and policy points. So we can go through some of these policies. Some of these policies are like really nice. For example, knowledge through steel, which we've tried. This, if you turn this on and then you go to your steel mill, you can see that it actually started to produce science as it suggests. So all these policies, they might have a very big change to their gameplay. So it's good to go through them and see which you would need. Let's go back to this one. Hopefully that's already unlocked. There you go. Wait. There you go. So we can actually unlock our clothing factory. We can build a clothing factory here. The reason I want to build clothing factory is that the clothing and shoe factory, let's see, let's upgrade a little bit. The clothing and the shoe factory will basically allow me to unlock Colosseum. Colosseum is the early game sort of culture production buildings where you can actually produce culture. And another thing I want to sort of address is that after I build the clothing factory, you can see there's a tiny kind of warning sign, and it says, well, it's not profitable, consider shutting it down. So why it's not profitable? Because the clothing factory turns plastic and paper into clothes. And the fact is not profitable, meaning that it actually makes more money by just selling the plastic and paper than just selling clothes. Meaning that by producing clothes, you're actually losing money. Well, now in the early game, this actually might not be that important because you're pretty much bounded by the export capacity. So it makes sense to actually export the most expensive stuff because you're pretty much capped by the money. So even if you lose a little bit of profit, you actually earn more money. So you're basically not making as much money as possible because you can't sell them as fast as possible anyway. So in the early game, it makes sense to actually sell the most expensive stuff. But later on, when you diversify your production, when you have way more stuff, it makes sense to only produce goods that actually are profitable, or at least for now. And even if it's not profitable, the other way to go around it is that you just produce it but don't sell it, because the market, as you can see here, it says the next market price will be in an hour. So the market readjusts every 2 hours. So something might not be profitable at the moment, but in 2 hours it might be super profitable. So it's good to just produce them and stockpile them, and you don't have to shut it down right away. This is just a nice warning that tells you that, well, if you're running out of fuel or running tight on power, if you want to shut down some building first, maybe consider shutting these buildings that has warning sign. So now I've waited enough so that I have actually unlocked the Colosseum. So let's build a Colosseum here. And it's always a good idea to check your power and your fuel before you expand. So my power seems okay, although the cycle is a bit annoying at the moment. And the fuel seems to be healthy. So we can see that the Colosseum actually takes a cloth and a shoe and convert it to culture. And the culture then get pulled by the policy center and then converted to policy points. So we can upgrade our Colosseum to increase, and you can see that it actually requires 50-50. So I'm producing 150. 100, so I'm producing way more than enough. In fact, I can build another one. I can build another Colosseum. So this altogether takes 100, and I'm producing 100 and 150, so more than enough. And here you can see that I'm actually constantly producing policy point, because these produce 50, 50, so these produce 100, and this actually turns 100 into 10, so I'm actually getting 10 policy points every second. So that means I can actually turn on a policy, like not permanently, but as long as I have supply. So let's see, I might want to turn on the supercharged oil wheel, so that it actually use more power, but it produce twice the oil. So this costs 20. Do we have a cheaper one? Let's see. Yeah, maybe Hearts of Iron. So this actually makes the steel mill use 50% less coal and 20% produce 20% more. Use 50% less coal, but use 25% more iron and 24% more power. So this will cost 10. So you can see that we actually have enough to maintain this. So we have like a stable policy points. We're not draining them. So as you can see now here, we actually use more iron, more power, and less coal. And we can use the extra coal for the core power plant here. So before you expand, as I always mention, check your fuel and power. And you can do this actually by going to the Statistics Bureau. And then if you can chart individual resources by clicking on them, and they will chart this, and you can see this resource over time. And also you can see on the top of the Statistics Bureau, if it shows you the capacity of your economy. So now I can see that my oil, so my economy takes 400 oil, but only I'm producing 300. And that means it's a good idea to actually increase the oil production, so I can build more oil well. So the game, it's always good to kind of have some kind of a surplus production, because it's always about balancing your economy and making sure that, you know, once you have a balanced economy, everything can be produced. So if I leave this running and just running on the background, at some point it's gonna run out of oil, so it's not gonna last. So to have a sustainable economy, it's always good to balance them. So let's produce more oil. Check the Statistics Bureau. Now everything is in balance. So if we leave this running for a while, it will actually become a self-sustainable economy, which is the goal you want it to be. And it's always a good idea to make sure that at least your fuel and your powers could sustain your production. Otherwise, when you run out of fuel, everything will halt, but then you can always go to the trade center and buy it in a short term while you're fixing it. Or if your economy is beyond fix, you can actually just start in a new city or just start in the same city. And one thing that I want to talk about is that each city, as you can see, have its own unique bonuses. As you can see, Stockholm, it has its own resource distribution. So Stockholm has a really even resource distribution. And there is a city bonus. So for example, Rotterdam has another set of resources. So Rotterdam has actually more iron and coal, and you can see that it actually has a lot of nice steel-based sort of city bonus, which makes it really nice to produce sort of steel and pursue that kind of a tech line. And I can just click start in Rotterdam to start there, but I'm not gonna, because this is gonna basically restart my base.